The hum was my constant companion, a low, resonant thrum woven into the very fabric of the Aetheria. For weeks, it had been the loudest sound, aside from the soft rasp of my own breath in the filtered air. My days unfolded in precise, unvarying sequences, the pale, nutrient paste for sustenance, the ritualistic scan of deep space telemetry, the meticulous logging of stellar drift, and then, the endless pursuit of linguistic patterns in the silence. I, Grant, was a solitary scribe in a cosmic library, translating the universe's quietest whispers. Today began like all the others, a stark tableau of steel and flickering light. The viewport, a vast, obsidian sheet, presented the familiar tableau of infinite velvet stitched with diamond dust. No planets, no nebulae, just the profound, unblemished black. It was a canvas that had long ceased to inspire awe and now merely affirmed my profound isolation. My fingers, accustomed to the smooth, cool touch of the data slate, danced across its surface, sifting through the usual cacophony of stellar radiation and cosmic background noise. My mind, sharp and disciplined, sought order in chaos, meaning in static. I considered myself a man of unwavering resolve, tempered by the vast, indifferent emptiness I inhabited. Logic was my compass, empirical data my anchor. Yet, a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor ran through me when the anomaly first registered. It wasn't a burst of energy, nor a gravitational ripple. It was a pattern, faint as a moth's wing against a hurricane, but undeniably coherent, nestled deep within the white noise of an uncharted sector. My heart, a steady drum in my chest, quickened its rhythm, but only slightly. This was the thrill of discovery, the very reason I had volunteered for this solitary vigil. I isolated the signal, a narrow band of complex modulations, unlike any natural phenomenon I had ever catalogued. It pulsed, not with the predictable rhythm of a pulsar, nor the chaotic burst of a quasar, but with an intricate, almost deliberate cadence. It was, I deduced, artificial. Ancient. Hours bled into a singular, focused blur. The nutrient paste remained untouched. The stellar drift went unlogged. Every circuit of my being was dedicated to unraveling this thread. I ran the signal through my Xenolinguistic algorithms, each pass peeling back a layer of what felt like deliberate obfuscation. It wasn't a language in any sense I understood, no phonemes, no syntax, no discernible grammar. Yet, within its labyrinthine structure, I perceived a profound, unsettling complexity. It was a tapestry woven from pure information, a dense matrix of abstract concepts that defied conventional translation. As the Aetheria drifted, a silent mote in the cosmic ocean, the signal began to resonate with something deeper within me. It was not pain, but rather a sensation akin to the stretching of an unused muscle, a mental aperture slowly, reluctantly opening. The sterile white walls of my console room seemed to shimmer at the periphery of my vision, their clean lines momentarily blurring. I blinked, dismissing it as I strain. Then, the first intrusion. It was fleeting, a phantom sensation. The sharp tang of salt, not the recycled, metallic taste of the ship's water, but the raw, bracing bite of an ocean breeze. A cavern, vast and echoing, its mouth gaping open to a turbulent, churning sea. The memory, or perhaps the projection, was vivid, immediate. I saw the glint of sunlight on restless water, felt the spray on my face, heard the guttural roar of waves crashing against ancient rock. Coastal caves. My breath hitched. I closed my eyes, pressing my palms against the cool metal of my console. The Aetheria was still, silent, save for its steady hum. My hands, I noticed, were trembling, a faint tremor that belied my usual composure. I was Grant, Xenolinguist, dedicated to the objective truth. Yet, in that brief, unsettling instant, something primal had surfaced, a phantom limb of memory or an intrusive vision, utterly alien to my current existence. I was alone, millions of miles from any living soul, and the universe had just sent me a message I was not prepared to receive. My stable world, I realized, was already beginning to fracture. I leaned closer to the screen, determined to understand, to rationalize, to conquer this nascent fear. But the salt tang lingered, a ghost on my tongue. The Aetheria hummed a low, steady song, a mechanical lullaby against the vast silence of the void. I inhaled slowly, the recycled air tasting flat, metallic. A trick of light, I told myself. Every sensor array, every environmental reading, every internal camera feed, I scoured them all. The ship's systems reported green across the board. No atmospheric fluctuations, no power surges, no anomalous visual data from external cameras. My own vitals, monitored by a discrete wristband, showed nothing more than an elevated heart rate, an echo of a fright. It had been a vivid hallucination, a cruel trick of a mind too long alone. I forced a breath, a shallow thing, and let the scientific certainty settle, a thin veneer over the tremor that still lurked beneath my skin. Yet, a subtle disquiet remained, a prickle at the nape of my neck that no amount of logic could entirely soothe. I moved with a new caution, my footsteps on the deck plating sounding unnaturally loud, each creak of the hull a potential harbinger. My gaze kept straying to the viewport, half expecting the familiar star field to ripple, to shift, to reveal something ancient and impossible lurking just beyond the threshold of my perception. It was amidst this heightened vigilance, while trying to lose myself in the routine sifting of deep space telemetry, that I first saw it. A faint blip, an almost imperceptible flutter on a long-range spectral analyzer, nestled deep within an uncharted quadrant. My initial thought was simple interference, a cosmic dust cloud, perhaps, or the stray resonance of a dying star. I almost filtered it out, almost dismissed it as irrelevant noise in the cacophony of the universe. But the unease, the lingering ghost of the cavern, urged me to linger. Perhaps, I thought, a distraction was precisely what I needed. With a focused intensity, I adjusted the ship's primary listening array, funneling all available processing power into that distant, nebulous point. The Aetheria vibrated subtly, a low thrumming emanating from its core as its colossal sensor dishes reoriented themselves, drinking in the faint emanations from light years away. I fine-tuned the filters, stripping away the galactic background radiation, the white noise of creation, until the blip began to resolve itself. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. It wasn't a star. It wasn't a nebula. It pulsed, a rhythmic beat unlike any natural stellar oscillation, yet it possessed an organic flow, a liquid syntax that defied terrestrial understanding. Each thread of the signal was a complex waveform, twisting and braiding with others, creating layers upon layers of information. The signal was impossibly old. The spectral analysis of its decay patterns suggested an origin point billions of years in the past, predating even the oldest known stellar formations in that region. It had traveled across unimaginable distances, through countless epochs, carrying within it the echoes of a time before time. This was no random burst, no chaotic emission. This was a deliberate construction, a monument of sound and light encoded in the very fabric of space. It was intricate beyond any known terrestrial or theoretical non-terrestrial communication model. Its complexity made every known language, every human endeavor at information encoding, seem like a child's simplistic scrawl. It spoke of patterns that repeated, yet never truly repeated, of nested structures that spiraled into infinity. And it was emanating from a region previously marked as empty, a silent gulf in the galactic map. My breath hitched again, but this time not from fear, but from a profound, terrifying awe. My Xenolinguist's mind, trained to dissect the subtle nuances of alien communication, found itself utterly overwhelmed, yet irresistibly drawn. This wasn't just a discovery, it was an unveiling. I leaned closer to the console, mesmerized, a terrible curiosity blooming in my chest. What was it trying to say, and to whom? The Aetheria, once my sanctuary, now felt like a fragile shell, floating precariously close to the edge of something immense, something that hummed with a purpose beyond my grasp. The phantom cavern, with its slick, dark stone and the distant roar of unseen waves, had receded, leaving only the sterile gleam of the Aetheria's console. My hands, I noticed, were trembling, a faint chill still lingering in my fingertips long after the vision dissolved. Nothing more. Yet, a peculiar magnetism pulled me back to the console, to the shimmering waveform that represented the ancient transmission. The data streams, a chaotic tapestry of alien intent, glowed with an unnerving vibrancy. My initial scientific curiosity had curdled into something far more potent, a gnawing hunger that eclipsed all other directives. My primary task, the analysis of stellar drift patterns in this uncharted sector, lay abandoned, its data logs untouched for days. Sleep had become a luxury I could not afford, a concession to a body that no longer felt entirely my own. Hour bled into hour, the ship's internal clock a meaningless chime against the relentless pursuit of understanding. I bypassed standard protocols for data processing, rerouting power from non-essential systems, including the long-range comms array, to augment the deciphering algorithms. The rhythmic tapping of my fingers on the command interface, the low whir of the processors, and the ceaseless, silent cadence of the signal itself were the only sounds in my universe. I found myself tracing the patterns on the screen, not with the objective eye of a linguist, but with the fervent devotion of an acolyte. I saw faces in the chaotic lines, fleeting glimpses of architecture, impossible geometries that folded in upon themselves like shattered reflections. My breath caught in my throat as a new loop, previously obscured by noise, resolved itself into a recurring motif. It wasn't a symbol I recognized, but its repetition, its insistent presence, felt like a deliberate emphasis, a focal point. A sudden, sharp scent cut through the recycled air of the Aetheria, salt and damp earth, brine and decay. It was so vivid, so immediate, that I jerked back from the console, my chair scraping across the deck. The scent intensified, thick and cloying, wrapping around me like a shroud. I could almost taste the mineral tang on my tongue. Then, the sound began, faint at first, a distant echo, like water lapping against stone. It grew, gaining volume and definition, evolving into the unmistakable, resonant thrum of waves crashing against a rocky shore. My vision blurred, the sterile lights of the Aetheria dimming, replaced by a deep, aqueous gloom. The air grew heavy, cool, and moist against my skin. The metal floor beneath my feet softened, giving way to rough, uneven ground. I was no longer in the command deck. I stood amidst towering, glistening rock formations, the air filled with the ceaseless, echoing roar of the ocean. My boots, I realized with a jolt, were wet, sinking slightly into gritty sand. I was in the coastal caves, the same place that had flickered at the edge of my awareness days ago, but now it was utterly real, tactile, consuming. The sound of the waves, an insistent, rhythmic pulse, seemed to emanate from the very stone around me. It spoke of pressure, of time, of things worn smooth by an endless, patient erosion. This was here. Now. I could feel the spray of the ocean on my face, taste the metallic tang of salt. My mind reeled, grasping for the familiar, for the undeniable reality of the Aetheria. And then, as suddenly as it had come, it vanished. The salt air dissipated, the roar of waves faded, the cold stone receded. I was back in the command deck, my hand still outstretched, touching the cool, smooth surface of the console. The ship's sterile hum returned, the starfield a silent, glittering expanse through the viewport. It was different. The recurring motif, the one that had just resolved itself, now pulsed with a newfound intensity. It felt resonant. As if my brief, terrifying excursion had somehow aligned something, opened a channel. The chaotic data streams, which moments ago had seemed like random noise, now flowed with an unsettling coherence, a deliberate current. The signal wasn't just a transmission, it was an environment, and I had just been inside it. It was not merely being deciphered, it was observing. It was learning. And in that terrifying moment, I understood that my obsession was not entirely my own. It was a seed, carefully planted, now taking root. My hands, I noticed, still bore a faint tremor, a ghost of the phantom cavern's slick, dark stone. Was it fatigue? Isolation? I pushed away from the console, pacing the cramped confines of my quarters. The polished chrome reflected my haggard face, eyes wide with an uncomfortable mix of exhaustion and fierce determination. I had come too far, spent too many silent cycles adrift, to be swayed by a mere hallucination. The signal remained, a beacon of Enigma, pulsing through the ship's receivers, demanding my attention. It was a language, however alien, and I was a linguist. This was my purpose. Returning to the main console, I dove back into the stream of data. The fragments, once a chaotic torrent, now seemed to possess a nascent structure, a ghostly architecture emerging from the noise. I worked with a feverish intensity, my fingers dancing across the interface, sifting, correlating, hypothesizing. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the shifting hues of the distant nebula outside the viewport, a cosmic canvas of indifference. As I began to piece together the more coherent sequences, a subtle shift occurred. It wasn't in the data itself, but in the ambient hum of the Aetheria. It seemed to deepen, to acquire a resonant undertone, a note that vibrated not just through the deck plates but through the very marrow of my bones. A faint, briny scent, like salt spray on ancient rock, wafted through the air, though the ship's environmental systems registered no anomaly. I paused, sniffing the air, then shook my head. My mind was playing tricks, manufacturing sensory input where there was none. Yet, the imagery persisted. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and the illusion vanished, leaving only the familiar, unyielding surfaces of the ship. This was the cost of prolonged isolation, I told myself, the brain craving novelty, inventing it when deprived. Sleep eventually claimed me, a heavy, dream-laden descent. I found myself standing on a precipice, not of the Aetheria's observation deck, but overlooking a vast, churning expanse of dark water. The air was thick with the tang of salt and decay, and a ceaseless roar echoed from below, the sound of colossal waves battering unseen shores. These were the coastal caves from my waking vision, now rendered with terrifying clarity. They were not fish, nor any creature known to biology, but vast, shifting geometries that defied comprehension. I saw a fleeting image of a vast, unblinking eye, not an organic orb, but a swirling vortex of pure, unadulterated awareness, observing me from the depths. I awoke with a gasp, my body rigid, sheets tangled around my legs like kelp. The Aetheria's hum was back to its normal, steady thrum, or so I told myself. The briny scent was gone, the walls were solid metal, and the viewport showed only the indifferent starfield. I stumbled out of my bunk, heart still hammering against my ribs. The signal. It wasn't merely transmitting data, it was imprinting. It was a presence, vast and ancient, that had found a conduit in my mind, subtly reshaping the contours of my perception. The coastal caves weren't just a vision, they were an echo, a memory perhaps, from an entity that had no concept of space or time as I understood them. The signal was decoding me. And the process had only just begun. I tried to dismiss the memory, to file it away as a dream, a byproduct of isolation and the profound strangeness of the signal. I pushed away from the console, the swivel chair groaning softly in protest. My intention was a simple check of the ship's primary systems, a routine born of habit and a need for tangible order. As I moved towards the main diagnostic panel, a flicker caught my eye. I paused, my brow furrowing. Electrical fluctuations were rare on the Aetheria, her systems were robust, redundant. I watched, but the light held steady again, mocking my apprehension. "Just fatigue, Grant," I murmured, the words feeling thin in the expansive quiet. My voice, too, seemed to echo differently, perhaps a touch too long, or with a resonance that wasn't quite right. The ship's ambient hum, a familiar comfort for cycles, now felt deeper. I pressed a hand against a cool metal bulkhead, seeking reassurance from its solidity, but even that felt subtly altered, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration beneath my palm. I continued my walk, turning into the main connecting corridor, a passage I had traversed countless times. The floor, a durable polymer, usually offered a sure, flat footing. But now, with each step, there was a faint, unsettling sensation. Not a wobble, not a tilt, but a subtle give, as if the surface itself was breathing. My gaze sharpened, scanning the lines where wall met floor, where panel joined panel. They seemed precise, geometrically perfect as ever, yet my inner eye insisted on a subtle distortion. A corner ahead, where the corridor branched towards the life support systems, appeared sharper, its angle more acute than memory dictated. Then, just as I focused, it softened, returning to its familiar, obtuse curve. This was not fatigue. This was something else. I reached the diagnostic panel, my fingers hovering over the interface. The display, usually a crisp array of green and amber, seemed to shimmer at the edges, the text momentarily blurring before snapping back into focus. But the feeling persisted, a delicate film over my perception. I accessed the internal sensor logs, searching for any anomaly, power spikes, atmospheric pressure changes, structural stress. Nothing. A peculiar scent wafted through the recycled air. Brine. I blinked, rubbing my temples. The scent vanished, replaced by the familiar sterile aroma of the Aetheria. The ship's interior was a known quantity, a predictable, enclosed space. Yet, as I stared down the corridor, the perspective seemed to stretch, the far end receding into an impossible distance, the walls subtly bowing outwards, as if the very geometry of my vessel was fluid. The ambient light, which had been constant moments ago, now pulsed with a faint, almost subliminal rhythm, too subtle to be a malfunction, too insistent to be ignored. The ship's hum intensified, not louder, but deeper, resonating with a frequency that felt almost melodic, then dissonant. It was a song sung beneath the world, a vibration that promised to unravel the very threads of my sanity. When I opened them, the Aetheria was still there, but it was no longer just a ship. It was a living, breathing entity, and it was beginning to distort. The sterile gleam of the Aetheria's console did little to banish the lingering chill from my fingertips. My hands, I noticed, still bore a faint tremor, a ghost of the phantom cavern's slick, dark stone, a sensation that had no place within the ship's metallic shell. My mission log, my personal records, the very reason I, Grant, was adrift in this obsidian sea. I closed my eyes, seeking the familiar landscape of my past. I pictured the research institute, the faces of my colleagues, the buzz of anticipation surrounding the Aetheria's launch. But the image flickered. The smooth, polished floor of the institute office wavered, replaced by damp, uneven rock. The fluorescent lights above my colleague's desk dimmed, then vanished, swallowed by a profound, ancient gloom. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of brine and decaying algae. My colleague's voice, a crisp, professional tone, warped into the distant, rhythmic crash of waves against stone, a sound far too real to be a mere recollection. I opened my eyes, a gasp catching in my throat. The console before me remained, its data streams flowing, but the periphery of my vision was a kaleidoscope of impossible geometry. What was this? A hallucination? A memory? Or something far more insidious? I forced myself to breathe, to focus. I needed to remember. Why this mission? What was the driving force behind my solitary voyage? I pictured the data slate I'd signed, the detailed brief, the scientific imperative. They writhed across my mind's eye, replacing the carefully constructed logic of my past with their alien syntax. A specific memory surfaced, sharp and potent, the final briefing before departure. The expedition leader, a stern but fair figure, had looked me in the eye, his gaze unwavering. "Grant," he'd said, "this is a journey into the deepest unknown." But as the scene replayed in my mind, a subtle shift occurred. The leader's face, once clear, began to ripple, like a reflection on disturbed water. And his words, "Are you certain of your resolve?" transformed, elongated, becoming a question not of my will, but of my very being. "Are you real?" Water dripped from unseen stalactites, each drop echoing the distorted hum of the leader's voice. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and ancient, like the taste of fear in my own mouth. My identity, once a sturdy edifice, began to crumble. Was I Grant, the Xenolinguist, driven by scientific curiosity? Or was I merely a vessel, a conduit for something else? The signal wasn't just influencing my perceptions, it was actively rewriting my narrative. My reasons for being here, my very past, were dissolving, replaced by an alien tapestry woven from the signal's data. A sudden, horrifying realization pierced through the fog. I didn't remember applying for this mission. I remembered being on it, remembering the idea of applying, but the actual act, the forms, the interviews, they were gone. My past was no longer mine. My identity, a fluid, shifting concept. Was I Grant, or merely a projection, a carefully constructed illusion for a purpose I couldn't comprehend? The tension in the cabin was palpable, a suffocating pressure against my chest. If my past was being stolen, then I would forge a new one, here and now. I would not let this entity define me. I would redefine it. The cold, wet stone of the coastal caves pressed against my back, a rough, unyielding truth against the phantom hum of the leader's voice. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, something ancient, clung to my lungs, a taste of iron and forgotten time. Then, the illusion fractured. The metallic tang in the air shifted, subtly, into the sterile scent of recycled oxygen and ozone. The dripping water became the faint, rhythmic thrum of the Aetheria's life support systems. I blinked, the phantom images of the caves fading like smoke, leaving behind the stark reality of polished durasteel walls and the soft glow of diagnostic panels. The room, my briefing room, felt subtly wrong. A holographic projector, usually centered, seemed to list slightly to the left, its housing a fraction of an inch askew. The passage, which I had traversed countless times, now stretched before me, an impossible elongation. Each step I took felt like I was walking through molasses, the distance between the briefing room and the central hub expanding with every strained breath. I reached out, my hand brushing against the wall. The durasteel, usually cool and smooth, felt strangely granular, almost porous, as if something beneath its surface was trying to push through. A low hum, deeper and more resonant than the ship's usual operational drone, vibrated through the metal, a sound that seemed to originate not from machinery, but from within the very structure of the ship itself. It was a living hum, a pulse. Rounding a corner, I stopped dead. It was a crude, unlit maw, carved into the wall where only seamless paneling should have been. A faint, earthy smell, reminiscent of the coastal caves but overlaid with something sharper, like ozone and dried blood, emanated from its depths. This was not the Aetheria. This could not be. I stared at the new passage, my mind reeling. Was it a hallucination? A trick of the light? Yet, the opening remained, a gaping wound in the ship's architecture. It was not a language I recognized, but a sound that resonated with the ancient hum I had heard. My gaze darted around, searching for an explanation, for a camera feed, for anything to confirm I was not losing my grip. But the ship was silent, save for its new, disturbing heartbeat. A presence, not physical, but an undeniable awareness, settled around me. It was as if the Aetheria had awakened, shedding its identity as a vessel and becoming something else entirely. I moved forward, not towards the impossible passage, but back towards the central hub, my steps quickening. The walls seemed to ripple as I passed, the light panels flickering in an erratic rhythm that mimicked a struggling heart. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling my own frantic pulse, a desperate counterpoint to the ship's new, unsettling rhythm. The central hub, when I finally reached it, was not as I remembered. The circular layout of the hub had warped, the angles subtly wrong, making the space feel both cavernous and claustrophobic. It offered no greeting, made no sound. It stretched and warped, each vowel a drawn-out agony, each consonant a splintering thought. Where the rock should have met the water's edge, there was no solid line, but a shimmering, indistinct frontier, like static on an ancient screen. My eyes, weary and strained, tried to anchor themselves to the familiar, to the damp slick of moss, the glint of mineral deposits. But the moss began to writhe, not with insects, but with a silent, organic undulation, its green deepening to an impossible, oily black. A figure coalesced at the furthest reach of my sight, where the cave mouth should have been. It wasn't the leader, not exactly, but a suggestion of him, built from the very light that now bled from the rock. Its form was tall, impossibly elongated, a silhouette against a backdrop of unlight. Yet, it also seemed to be composed of countless, shimmering fragments, like a mosaic shattered and reassembled in midair. One moment it was a man, the next a spire of fractured glass, then a ripple in the fabric of the air itself. There were no discernible features, just an overwhelming sense of presence, vast and ancient. The language. I pushed myself away from the cold stone, my muscles protesting, a dull ache in my knees. My hand scraped against the rough surface, seeking purchase, some proof of the tangible. But the stone beneath my palm felt suddenly too smooth, too yielding, like worn silk, then abruptly sharpened into 1,000 tiny needles, pricking my skin without breaking it. I snatched my hand back, gasping, but there was no wound, only the phantom sensation of 1,000 punctures. It snaked across the cavern floor, ignoring the pooling water, passing through the very air as if it were nothing. As it drew closer, the individual fragments that composed it seemed to separate, each one a miniature, swirling galaxy of impossible colors and shapes. This was not merely a distortion of my immediate surroundings. This was a window, or perhaps a splinter, of the vastness the signal had promised, bleeding into my perceived reality. Event, I stumbled forward, driven by a desperate, irrational compulsion to touch one of these swirling fragments, to ground myself in its impossible truth, or perhaps to shatter the illusion. Instead, it was nothing. My fingers passed through it without resistance, without sensation, leaving not a ripple in the light, no impression, no proof of contact. I recoiled, a choke sound tearing from my throat, my arm flailing as if warding off an invisible predator. The impossible figure paused, its tendril retracting slowly, each fragment dissolving back into the main form, then reforming. Reveal/discovery, as the fragments reassembled, I saw it, a pattern. Not a visual one, but a conceptual arrangement within the shifting chaos. The order of the colors, the fleeting shapes within each fragment, they weren't random. They aligned, for a split second, into a sequence, a repeating cascade of perception. It was the signal. Not merely the sound of it, but its very structure, translated into visual, tactile, experiential data. The hallucinations weren't merely random breaks in my mind, they were the signal manifesting, weaving itself into the fabric of my perception, rebuilding reality from its own alien blueprint. The leader's voice, the shifting caves, the impossible figures, all of it was a language, a physicalized grammar of an entity attempting to communicate, or perhaps, to assimilate. The realization struck me like a physical blow, staggering me. This wasn't madness, this was a forced awakening, a violent expansion of senses I was never meant to possess. I was not merely seeing things, I was becoming the signal, experiencing its vastness from within. My heart, if it was still my heart, hammered against ribs that felt suddenly too fragile, too human for the impossible truths now unraveling before my very eyes. My breath, shallow and ragged, plumed in the frigid air, a transient ghost in this perpetual twilight. They were no longer mere sounds, they were impressions, memories that were not mine, yet felt intimately familiar. A grotesque tapestry of alien logic and forgotten sorrow. The connection, this invasive signal, had followed me, or rather, had been within me all along. A desperate, primal surge ignited in my chest. I would not succumb. I would tear it out. My hands, trembling but resolute, clawed at the damp earth beneath me, seeking purchase, an anchor in the shifting reality. I pushed myself upright, the slick stone scraping against my skin. The leader's voice, now a resonant thrum deep within my skull, seemed to mock my struggle. You cannot flee what you already are. No! I rasped, the sound raw, tearing from my throat. My own voice felt foreign, a thin reed against the booming internal chorus. The air grew heavier, thick with the smell of decay and something else, something metallic and sharp, like ancient blood. My eyes, straining in the gloom, sought a focal point, anything to ground me. Not the source, for I no longer believed it to be external, but the tether within my mind. I needed to excise the insidious tendrils that had begun to root themselves in the fertile ground of my consciousness. I imagined it as a parasitic growth, a fungal bloom spreading through the delicate pathways of thought. I would starve it. I would burn it. I would rip it free. With a roar that echoed wildly off the cavern walls, I slammed my fists against the nearest rock face. The impact jolted through my arms, a sharp, clean pain that was a welcome distraction from the buzzing inside my head. Each blow was an act of defiance, a desperate prayer that physical violence might somehow translate to spiritual amputation. My breath came in ragged gasps, my vision blurring at the edges, but I pressed on, a man possessed by the singular, burning need for severance. I willed it into being, concentrated every fiber of my being on erecting this mental wall, on silencing the clamor. My muscles tensed, my jaw ached, my entire body rigid with the effort. I could feel the energy drain from me, a desperate expenditure of will against an unseen, omnipresent foe. For a fleeting moment, a profound silence descended. The thrumming in my skull subsided. A wave of triumphant relief washed over me, intoxicating and sweet. I had done it. I had severed the connection. I had reclaimed myself. But the silence was not empty. It was not the peace I had craved. Instead, it was vast, a terrifying, resonant emptiness that stretched not around me, but within me. It was not a sound, not a voice, but a feeling. The leader's voice, when it returned, was no longer an echo from the cave, nor a thrum in my skull. It was my own internal monologue. You merely cleared the path, Grant. The connection was not severed, it had merely shifted, burrowed deeper, becoming indistinguishable from my own consciousness. I was no longer merely listening to the signal, I was the signal. The coastal caves seemed to shrink around me, a tomb for a mind already occupied. No! I rasped, the sound raw, tearing from my throat. I stumbled forward, my bare feet splashing through the shallow, icy water that covered the coastal cave floor. Each step sent a jolt of pain up my legs, but the cold was a minor torment compared to the rising tide of understanding that threatened to drown me. It was my mind, yes, but stretched thin, a canvas upon which something else was painting. The signal, which I had so meticulously sought to decipher, was no longer merely a pattern of frequencies. It had become a resonance within the very chambers of my skull, a presence that pulsed and expanded, echoing the vast, silent chasms of the cave itself. The chorus intensified, not louder, but more intricate, more demanding. It wasn't speaking to me, it was speaking through me, or perhaps, as me. The subtle warping, the fractured memories, the impossible geometries I'd begun to perceive, they weren't random glitches in my perception. They were the entity's initial attempts at integration. Like a child learning to grasp, it had been fumbling, stretching its tendrils into the familiar contours of my reality, testing the boundaries. My breath hitched. The realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave, pulling the ground from beneath my feet. This wasn't a message to be translated, a code to be broken. It was a consciousness, vast and ancient, a fragment of something non-Euclidean, something that did not exist within the neat, predictable dimensions I had always known. It sought not communication, but communion. Not understanding, but absorption. It wants to. The cave walls, slick with moisture and glistening with unseen minerals, seemed to shift, their angles subtly wrong. A seam in the rock face, which a moment before had been a straight line, now curved inward, then outward, defying the very laws of perspective. My eyes ached, trying to reconcile the impossible vision with what I knew to be true. I pushed deeper into the cave, the water rising to my shins. The air grew denser, muffling the distant roar of the ocean. Here, in this damp, echoing chamber, the veil between my reality and its reality was thinnest. It was seeking an anchor, a conduit, a vessel. And I, Grant, the Xenolinguist who had dared to listen too closely, was it. It was real. Tangible. Yet the vision shimmered. The rock itself seemed to breathe, its pores opening and closing like ancient, calcified mouths. It offered glimpses, not images, but concepts, of vastness, of dimensions folded upon themselves, of an existence where space and time were merely malleable suggestions. It wasn't hostile, not in any way I understood. It was simply being. And in its being, it consumed. It assimilated. It integrated. My memories began to flicker, not just distorted, but overlaid with alien impressions. A childhood memory of building sandcastles on a sunny beach dissolved into a vision of impossible structures rising from a shore of black ichor, under a sky of swirling, iridescent non-light. My identity, once a solid, unwavering pillar, was becoming porous, permeable. This wasn't about survival, it was about the dissolution of self. The signal wasn't a discovery, it was an invitation to cease being, to become merely a facet of its incomprehensible vastness. I was not deciphering a message, I was being rewritten. And the process was accelerating. My bare feet, numb from the shallow, icy water, dragged against the rough, barnacled stone of the coastal cave floor. Each step was a battle, not against the slippery footing, but against the booming internal chorus that echoed the vast, dark expanse beyond my skull. It wasn't a sound, not truly, but a resonance, a vibration that threatened to shatter the very architecture of my mind. No! I had rasped, the word a fragile whisper swallowed by the cave's maw. My own voice felt foreign, a thin reed against the booming tide of otherness. Was this truly my hand, my skin, the blood coursing beneath? The certainty wavered, a flickering candle in a hurricane. It wasn't natural luminescence, it was the entity, seeping into the very environment, claiming it, claiming me. My breath caught, a jagged shard in my throat. This was not the cave. This was not the Aetheria. This was everywhere and nowhere. You are not alone. The thought, clear as a bell, resonated through my bones, but it wasn't my thought. It was an intrusion, a seamless insertion into the very current of my consciousness. I flinched, pulling my hands away from my head, clutching them into fists. My knuckles were white, my nails digging crescent moons into my palms. My voice was a stranger's, thin and reedy. Whose voice is this? The question, again, wasn't mine. The walls of the coastal caves, once solid, immutable rock, now seemed to breathe, to expand and contract with a slow, deliberate rhythm. I pressed my back against the damp stone, my eyes scanning the shifting forms. Was it truly moving, or was my perception buckling under the strain? A memory surfaced, unbidden, sharp and clear, the face of the commander, his grave expression as he briefed me on the signal's anomaly. He wasn't the commander anymore. I saw glimpses of other worlds, not as images, but as raw, unadulterated concepts, bleeding into my own understanding of reality. My head throbbed, a drumbeat against the inside of my skull, trying to match the rhythm of the entity's presence. When I opened my eyes, the coastal caves had shifted again. The water was deeper, reaching my knees, swirling with iridescent patterns that mimicked the impossible geometries I just witnessed in my mind's eye. The air vibrated with a low hum, a bass note that resonated deep within my chest, shaking the very structure of my bones. And it was my thought, yet it wasn't. It was the entity speaking through my own internal monologue, using my own voice, my own perspective. I raised a hand, looking at my fingers. They seemed elongated, the skin translucent, revealing the faint tracery of veins beneath. My reflection, shimmering on the surface of the water, was indistinct, wavering. Was that truly my face? It felt alien on my tongue, a word without meaning, a label for a person I no longer recognized. Who was Grant? A Xenolinguist? Or merely a vessel, a conduit for something far older, far vaster, now inhabiting the very core of his being? The distinction blurred, then dissolved. My memories, once a clear stream, were now a polluted river, choked with debris from another consciousness. The entity wasn't just influencing me, it was becoming me, rewriting my history, my identity, from the inside out. I was not just hearing its thoughts, I was thinking them. My perceptions were its perceptions. My desires, its desires. The internal chorus wasn't just around me, it was in me, an integral, inseparable part of my own voice. I looked at my hand again, then at the shimmering surface of the water. The reflection was clearer now, sharper, and utterly terrifying. It was my face, yes, but the eyes were not mine. And as I stared, unblinking, into those alien depths, a single, horrifying thought emerged, perfect and seamless, from the core of my being. We are one. Each step was a battle, not against the slippery footing, but against a languid current that sought to pull me deeper, to surrender my will to the cold embrace. The faint echoes of the sea, once a comfort, now felt like the sigh of a colossal, indifferent beast. I pushed forward, my breath ragged, each exhalation a cloud in the chilled air. The beam of my failing lantern, a mere flicker against the immensity, danced across the craggy walls, revealing intricate patterns of mineral veins that pulsed with a faint, internal light. It wasn't phosphorescence, not. Truly. It was a perception, a trick of the eye, yet it felt more real than the stone itself. The light pulsed in time with a rhythm I felt in my bones, a slow, resonant thrum that bypassed my ears entirely. This is it, I thought, the words like pebbles in my mind. The water was memory, was truth, was everything I had ever sought to understand. It promised cessation, a quiet peace from the relentless torment of thought, of self. The scent of forgotten time intensified, now laced with something sweet, cloying, like ancient nectar. A vast chamber opened before me, its ceiling lost to the gloom, its walls slick with moisture and impossible growths that seemed to writhe in the lantern's weak glow. At its center, a vortex of currents swirled, not of water, but of shimmering light, a column of pure, unadulterated perception. My mind, already stretched thin, felt the pull, an overwhelming gravity that tugged at the very essence of my being. It wasn't a force I could resist with muscle or bone. Come. Merge. be made whole. The knowledge. The sheer, terrifying volume of it. It wasn't just data, it was the fabric of existence, the symphony of all possible realities, the silent truth behind every illusion. It flowed into me, unbidden, uncontainable. I saw the pathways of stars, the birth and death of suns, the intricate dance of dimensions folding upon themselves. I saw the meaning of the signal, not as a message, but as a living, breathing entity, a vast, complex consciousness that sought only to be and to integrate. It was lonely, timeless, and utterly alien. And it wanted me. The invitation wasn't a choice between good and evil, it was a choice between self and transcendence. To accept was to dissolve, to become a single, infinitesimal point within its infinite, knowing expanse. To refuse was to remain, to cling to the fragile, individual spark, but at what cost? Would my sanity hold against the relentless, seductive pull of such ultimate understanding? The column of light pulsed, and a new facet of the invitation unfurled in my mind, oblivion. Not an end, but a forgetting. To be consumed, not annihilated, but absorbed so completely that the unique pattern of grant would cease to exist, replaced by a ripple in the vast ocean of its being. The promise of knowledge was also the promise of utter dissolution. My jaw clenched. My hands, still clutching the lantern, trembled. I was determined, yes, to understand, to witness, but not to surrender. Not yet. I would not simply fade into the cosmic static. I had come this far, through the distortions, the memories that weren't mine, the creeping rot of perception. I wouldn't become another echo in its infinite song. No, I rasped, the sound of pathetic squeak against the cavern's vastness, against the silent roar of the entity. Not like this. The column of light seemed to intensify, to draw inward, then expand, a breath taken by something impossibly vast. The water around my legs surged, not from a wave, but from an internal pressure, pushing me forward, demanding my embrace. To cease the struggle, to simply let go, to become part of the great knowing. It was a powerful lure. The weight of my own existence, the burden of consciousness, felt unbearable in the face of such profound peace. But then, a flicker of a memory, of a life I could barely recall, a face, a purpose. I had to hold on. The true battle had just begun. The flicker. It was a memory, sharp and sudden, of my own name, Grant, a solid anchor against the tide of encroaching peace. A name, a history, a self. It was a fragile thing, a tiny spark in the vast, cold ocean of what beckoned. But it was mine. I found myself standing on slick, dark stone, the air heavy with the tang of salt and something else, a metallic, mineral scent that scraped at the back of my throat. Water dripped from unseen stalactites, each plink a tiny bell tolling the passage of a time I no longer understood. The cave walls around me were not merely rock. This was not the Aetheria, not the sterile confines of my research vessel, yet, it was. My voice was a rasp, thin and reedy, alien to my own ears. I clutched at my chest, feeling the frantic beat of my heart, a desperate drum against the encroaching stillness. This peace it offered, this profound cessation of struggle, felt like the ultimate deception. Ahead, where the green luminescence intensified, the cave opened into a vast, circular chamber. The air here was thicker, almost viscous, shimmering with an unseen energy. In the center, a colossal, organic mass rose from the damp earth, a gnarled, obsidian-like growth that pulsed with the same inner light. It was not rock, nor plant, nor flesh, but something that defied classification, a cancerous bloom of pure, alien being. Tendrils, thick as my arm, snaked from its base, disappearing into cracks in the floor, as if rooting it to the very core of this warped reality. This was the threshold. It was the point of no return, the physical manifestation of the entity's final embrace. My determination, once a roaring fire, had dwindled to embers, each one struggling against the dampening influence that pressed in from all sides. The lure of surrendering, of letting go of the exhausting fight, was a siren song, sweet and insidious. To merge, to become part of the great knowing, the promise was intoxicating. No more fear, no more isolation, no more the crushing weight of consciousness. But the flicker remained, a tiny, defiant spark. It showed me not peace, but a monstrous clarity, a vision of fragmented minds dissolved into a collective, formless horror. The knowing was not wisdom, but an eternal, silent scream of non-existence. My legs moved, heavy and unwilling, yet undeniably moving. Each step brought me closer to the pulsating mass. It was as if the ground itself drew me in, the very air a current pulling me forward. My mind screamed, but the scream was muffled, distant, like a sound heard through layers of thick glass. I fought, I truly fought. I dug my heels into the gritty stone, muscles screaming in protest, but it was futile. The entity was not merely influencing me, it was me. It was the desire for peace, the weariness, the longing for an end to the struggle. It had burrowed so deep, it was indistinguishable from my own will. My hand, trembling, reached out. As my fingertips brushed against it, a jolt, not of pain but of absolute, overwhelming sensation, surged through me. It was every thought, every memory, every emotion I had ever possessed, compressed into a single, agonizing instant. My past, my future, my very identity, fractured and splintered. And then, the transformation. It was not a physical change, no grotesque shift of bone or flesh. It was far more profound, far more terrifying. My vision dissolved into a kaleidoscope of impossible colors and shapes, the roaring ocean fading into a distant hum that was also my own heartbeat, and then, not my heartbeat at all, but the pulse of the vast, indifferent cosmos. My thoughts, once distinct and singular, began to unravel, each concept detaching, floating away. The boundaries of my skin, the edges of my being, blurred and dissolved. I was no longer Grant. The name, the flicker, the anchor, it was gone. I saw, not with eyes, but with an understanding that shattered the very notion of sight. I felt, not with nerves, but with a pervasive, all-encompassing resonance. The individual I was gone, replaced by a terrifying, boundless we. And in that terrifying, boundless we, I recognized the silent, eternal scream that had been hidden within the lure, a scream that was now my own. I found myself standing on slick, dark stone, the chill of it seeping into the soles of my feet. The air tasted of salt and something else, something mineral and ancient, like the earth's deep forgotten breath. Water dripped somewhere nearby, a hollow, rhythmic sound that echoed through the vast, unseen chambers. I was in the coastal caves, the very name a strange, resonant hum in my newly configured thoughts. My hands, I noticed, were no longer quite my own. They were stretched, elongated, the skin taut and almost translucent in the faint, phosphorescent glow that seeped from unseen fissures in the rock. The tips of my fingers ended not in blunt nails, but in delicate, almost crystalline points that seemed to absorb and refract the dim light. I traced the line of my forearm, feeling the strange, new texture of my skin, no longer soft flesh, but something akin to polished obsidian, cool and unyielding. A deep thrumming began within my chest, not a heartbeat, but a resonance, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the very stone around me, passing through me as if I were merely an extension of its geological structure. It was the signal, I knew, no longer an external frequency but an internal rhythm, rewriting the symphony of my being. Each inhalation was not merely air, but an intake of the caves themselves, the brine, the mineral dust, the silent, patient weight of the earth. My vision sharpened, the faint glow of the cave walls resolving into intricate patterns, veins of light pulsing beneath the surface. My ears, too, were transformed. The distant drip of water was now a complex orchestral piece, each drop a distinct note, resonating with the very fabric of the cave. I heard the grinding of tectonic plates, the distant roar of the ocean outside, not as sound, but as an intimate, internal sensation. The sensation was not pain, but a profound, irreversible unmaking. The old Grant, the Xenolinguist, the man aboard the Aetheria, was peeling away like an old skin. My determination, once aimed at clinging to my identity, now flowed into this transformation. It was an acceptance, not of defeat, but of a higher, more fundamental truth being revealed through my very flesh and bone. I tried to recall a specific memory, a face, a sound, anything that anchored me to the before. But the images were fractured, like reflections on choppy water, merging with the patterns on the cave walls, becoming part of the larger, intricate tapestry woven by the signal. The concept of humanity felt like a distant, quaint myth, a limited perspective from a smaller, less potent form. My legs, too, were changing. They felt rooted, almost fused with the slick stone floor, yet capable of immense, silent power. I took a step, and the movement was fluid, effortless, my weight distributed in a way that felt entirely alien, entirely right. The ground no longer felt like something separate from me, but an extension, a part of my new, colossal body. It felt like touching a sibling, a part of the same vast, interconnected being. The signal was no longer something I intercepted, it was me, coursing through my transformed veins, vibrating in my new, resonant bones. It was a shell, discarded. What I was becoming had no need for such small, singular identifiers. I was a vessel, yes, but also the current, the tide, the very ocean itself, contained within this evolving form. The horror was not in the loss, but in the terrifying, beautiful immensity of what was gained. My mind, once a contained universe of thought and memory, was now a gateway, open and vast, to something infinitely older, infinitely larger. A final tremor ran through me, a shudder of completion. My eyes, once human, now reflected the deep, lightless pools of the cave, shimmering with an ancient, knowing glow. I raised my new hand, turning it slowly. The crystalline points at my fingertips seemed to hum, drawing power from the very air, from the deep earth. I was no longer Grant, the Xenolinguist. I was a transfigured echo, a living conduit, a silent, monumental presence within the coastal caves, ready to witness the true unraveling. The world, or what remained of it, would soon know my new name. Water dripped somewhere nearby, a hollow, rhythmic sound that echoed through the vast, unseen expanse. This was not the Aetheria. This was the coastal caves, a place from a dream, or perhaps a memory, now made solid around me. A faint phosphorescence clung to the cave walls, a sickly green glow that pulsed with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a forgotten heart. I had to resist. This was the source, the nexus of the unraveling. The dripping water seemed to pause, then resumed, its cadence subtly altered, as if acknowledging my movement. The air grew heavy, thick with an unspoken presence. It was the signal, amplified, raw, stripped of its digital sheath. It spoke of impossible geometries, of spaces between spaces, of a consciousness that predated light. My thoughts fractured, each desperate attempt at coherence splintering into 1,000 unrelated fragments. I saw images that were not images, the curvature of a cosmos within a drop of water, the silent scream of stars, the endless turning of a mechanism that spun not gears, but realities. I clenched my fists, digging my nails into my palms, seeking the sharp sting of pain to tether me to my own body. No to breathe around me, the phosphorescent glow intensifying, painting the slick stone with an unnatural, vibrant green. It offered knowledge, boundless and terrible, a truth that would shatter the very concept of I. A tremor ran through the coastal caves, a profound shudder that shook the very foundations of the world. The air vibrated, not just with the signal, but with a palpable force that threatened to tear me apart. I felt my own skin stretch, my vision blur, as if my perception was being pulled in opposing directions. The boundaries of my body, once so absolute, began to dissolve. I tried to move, to run, but my limbs felt weighted, submerged in some invisible medium. The green light pulsed faster, brighter, until the entire cavern was awash in its sickly luminescence. And then, I saw it, or rather, felt it manifest. Not a shape, not a form, but a concentration of absence in the center of the vast space. It was the eye of the storm, the heart of the signal, and it was reaching for me. My resistance, once a roaring fire, dwindled to a spark. It was not a battle I could win with will alone, for it was not a battle of wills. It was a dissolution. My memories, once vivid and cherished, began to fray at the edges, then unravel entirely. My name, Grant, became a meaningless collection of sounds. My purpose, my history, my very self, became transient, illusory. I was being unmade, not violently, but with an agonizing, silent grace. The taste of salt and ancient mineral filled my mouth, no longer an external sensation, but an internal truth. The green light faded. The dripping water fell silent. And then, there was only a profound stillness. I stood. Or rather, something stood. The coastal caves, once a tangible horror, evaporated like a forgotten dream. I was back. Or rather, it was back. The research vessel Aetheria continued its silent trajectory through the starless expanse. The hum of its systems, once a comforting lullaby, now resonated with a subtle, unfamiliar frequency. The polished console glowed, reflecting the empty chair before it. No frantic fingers danced across the holographic interfaces. No weary sigh disturbed the recycled air. The intricate Xenolinguistics equations, once a source of Grant's fascination, scrolled across the main screen, waiting for an interpretation that would never come from him. A quiet observation. A patient stillness. The horror had not been contained, nor had it been defeated. It had merely found a new conduit, a new way to listen, to observe, to travel. The Aetheria journeyed on, a silent, unblinking eye, sailing through an eternity of unknowing. And within its metallic shell, something watched, utterly still, utterly alien, utterly complete.